I am a lucky boy because I've got some time with Heather Campbell, who's the CEO, I believe, of Bush Heritage Australia. Was I correct in your title?
Yes, you would.
Because I didn't write that down.
Lucky and privileged. Well, I'm really lucky and privileged to be the CEO of Bush Heritage, so it's a great gig to have.
I've been following you guys as a term for a while, a few years, and been keeping track of what you do. But recently there seemed to be an upswing in your social media activity, which has made me think more about Bush Heritage Australia and what you're up to, and also with COVID. And people say animals are streaming back into the cities during the first lockdown, which I don't really totally believe. But what's the mission statement of Bush Heritage Australia, so you can put everyone straight what you're about?
So we're about what we call healthy country protected forever. So what that means is we're trying to bring the bush back to good health. So, swing things in favour of our native species. So that means that we do this in a couple of different ways. So we have conservation reserves that we own and operate for conservation all over the country. So 1 million hectares, which is sort of a lot, but they're really small ones up to really large ones.
Yeah.
And so what we do on those is we're managing fire, we're managing, weeds and feral animals, so that we swing the balance in favour of our native species so that they can thrive. And we do it at scale. Good. We do it across, large landscapes across Australia.
You purchase land. What land is suitable to be purchased, and what have you got your eye on?
So one of the things that we do is we recognise Australia is huge and we can't operate everywhere. So a few years ago, the team sat down and worked out what are those special areas that need to be protected, that are underrepresented in our national parks and our other conservation reserves around the country. So we came up with 19 different areas that we focus on. And then what we do with those is we've put, the climate change lens over it. For some parts of Australia, that's great. They're going to be resilient. For other parts, they're going to need a bit more intervention. And so through that, we then go through and then we basically map stuff down to the property level, and we're looking for those areas of glorious little pristine bits that need to be protected, but also how we can reconnect the landscapes. Because with climate change, we need bigger landscapes where species can move through them, and they need the hills and the valleys where they can hide out. So this is about connecting up the landscape, strengthening it, having those areas for our species. So we put that lens over a lot. We look at it down to the property level, and then we identify those properties, and hopefully we're able to have discussions to purchase them. But as we know, sometimes that's very dependent on, owners, the timing, the marketplace, etc.
Yes. Well, this comes nicely to my grand plan to save Australia, which is my probably pretty mad plan of just for the government to buy back all the marginal farmland. that every time there's a bit of a drought, it gets flogged to death and isn't really working anymore. But that's just something I lie back on my bed and think about. But that I'm specifically, I'm specifically talking maybe about far western land in New South Wales. It's a very specific plan.
But Dan, that's a really good actual, link into some of the other stuff we do. So we don't just buy land and manage it for conservation. We also work really closely with traditional owners on the land that we've purchased, but also on land that they're managing. So we work together to heal that land. And then we also recognise that greater than 50% of Australia is in agricultural production. So looking at how do we work with those farmers and pastoralists who really care deeply about the land and care about the species that are there, and how can we add our ecological knowledge to help them manage. And so we're doing a lot more work in that area, and whether it be around our existing reserves or slightly further, but really working with them, because there are some farmers who are phenomenal and care deeply about how they manage the land and how they manage it for the future.
Yeah, you see that as you're even driving along the road. You'll see one farmer is dead keen on getting rid of weeds and making good everything, and the other person not so much. So, but that's people. People are different, aren't they? And I watch a lot of videos on restoration of this creek, that gully, that field, stuff like that. But these are pretty small areas, but biodiversity can be contained to a pretty small area. Biodiversity is becoming more and more important, isn't it?
Oh, it's critical because we need all the different species, the plants, the smallest ant to the tallest tree, for it to work, for it to be a functioning ecosystem, to have those things we love. So what is really important is finding those little slivers of land which have species still existing in them, connecting them up, doing some of that re-veg work. And some of that will be relatively narrow corridors, but some of that will also be huge landscapes. So some of the properties that we have are 200,000 hectares. So they're large landscapes, and with species are able to move through that. But the key thing is let's find what we've got out there, because I'm sure there's a whole lot of little gems that people don't realise are hidden down a roadside or down a little gully. And there's lots of work being done across Australia to find where everything's hiding out at the moment.
Wow, amazing. And we can't concentrate on just the cute animals, right? We've got to think of the ones that might be a bit more homely, or how do we want to explain them? They might be just downright ugly, but they've still got a place in the ecosystem, right? So,
and I think it's really important that we remember that we need the plants, because without them and without the hollows and everything else, then we're not going to have the animals, but also the interrelationship between them. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners would have heard about that relationship between the boggon moths and the mountain pygmy possum. And without the boggon moths, the mountain pygmy possums haven't got anything to eat. So there's that really clear interrelationship, and species can travel a long distance. One of the things I really love is one of our reserves in southwest and Western Australia. We've done some revegetation work, and we know we've got the habitat right because we've got these glorious tiny little honey possums that sit in the palm of your hand, and they're a nectar feeding possum. So they need the right trees and shrubs. And the team recently completed an ecological survey and found lots of little honey possums and pygmy possums. And that tells me that we're getting the habitat right.
Absolutely. So I also dream about, rolling back climate change, stuff like that. And I like to say to people who are skeptical, sure, we can't go back 400 years to the start of the Industrial Revolution or before, but if we could take it back 50 years, that would be a really good start. But hey, I'm an amateur. Do you guys get involved in those really big issues, or you're more focusing on what you need to do?
So we get involved in them in two ways. One is looking at the impact that climate change will have, on the Australian species, and also then looking at, well, what do we need to do to give those species a chance into the future? So to give an example, we've done a project where we've taken seed, same trees, but from a hotter area. So we've taken them from New South Wales and planted them on one of our Victorian reserves to see if we can, over time, breed up a more resilient yellow box and grey box tree. So we look at that, but then we also very carefully look at our own footprint. What's the footprint we have as an organisation? We use vehicles, we fly places, we have, housing, etc. How can we reduce that footprint? How can we be part of that global movement of people who say, actually, we really need to do something now to reduce the impacts of climate change? And the only way to do that is stop actually putting as much carbon up into the atmosphere.
Absolutely. Good point. And my wife came back excitedly a few weeks ago and told me about she'd met someone who was getting into drone spraying of weeds. And then I looked at your research page, and there was a squillion different things to check out over at Bush Heritage Australia. And I noticed that you guys were using drones for stuff, and I was amazed. But I don't know why I was amazed. I thought, they're right on top of everything.
It's one of those sort of newer areas of how can we use drones, how can we use satellite footage, how do you use data at different levels? Yeah. So there's quite a few groups, including ourselves, looking at, well, can we use drones for weeds? Can we use them for seeding, seeding of plants? So how can we actually do things like that? So there's lots of really cool stuff happening, because if we're wanting to actually use revegetation as part of the solution to absorb more carbon, then how do we actually get more plants and trees out there and successfully planted and growing? But drones are pretty cool. You can do lots of things with them, but it's how it meshes in with all of the other technology. And also, we still need those amazing ecologists who are good at finding the really minute so that it all connects together.
Absolutely. Well, get a drone done. Sometimes you're getting down in a gully and you think, oh, this should be okay. And then you get a few minutes down and you think, oh, this isn't okay. That's when the drones might come into play.
Yeah, but you can imagine with drones too that you can actually cover areas that would be really hard to otherwise.
Yeah.
Or that might be hard to from a safety perspective.
Yeah.
And so that becomes really important because we're operating in some really remote areas, on the edge of the Simpson, for example. They're fairly inhospitable. So if you can certainly use a drone in some of the heat more than you can use humans. So how do you use those different technologies?
Yeah. Well, what you see when a property or a farmhouse has been left to go to seed, if you like, the country wants to bounce back, doesn't it? You see that pretty quickly. Do you have any strong opinions on like retaining weed and exotic, plant species just to hold the soil there while you get a handle on revegetating native species? Is that something that you guys get involved in?
Look, it is in some areas. I think the key thing here, it's got to be really specific to the ecosystem you're in, to the place and what's going to work there. So at our Scottsdale Reserve, which was an old sheep property, it was almost like a sea of lovegrass when we first purchased it. And it was important to actually leave a little bit of that there while we then had other weeds come up. And we're actually these days much rather have a few of the broad leaf weeds in there while we get the native grasses and the herbs coming up. So the team have got a really complex process that they use to actually look at which weeds are important at which times, build up the seed bank of the native species, and then try and make sure that they can get a chance. So it's fascinating when I walk around with that team. They get me completely bamboozled, but I know they're completely on top of it with all of the work they have to do, looking at which weed when they have to worry about.
Yes, they're on top of that. They're doing that. Now, one of my favourite pet project of Bush Heritage Australia was the red-finned blue eye, because I've been a fish keeper these many decades. And I've kept a lot of native species, but can you tell us a little bit about a couple of acres it was confined to, right?
Yeah, so it only exists on our Edgbaston Reserve and because of the natural springs that are there. But it's really under attack by some invasive species fish. So what we've done is we've got this fencing, and people might think, well, you're fencing for fish. And it's effectively a low height little mesh, like, shade cloth type thing, so that we can actually try and keep those invasive species out from the areas where we've got the red-fin blue eye. And the team have also been working with one of the universities to do some captive breeding to release back into those ponds to make sure that we've got a good mix of genetics. So I haven't been up there yet. We had the joys of COVID, of course, couldn't go to Queensland. And now, of course, it's rained. So none of us can quite get there at the moment. But I'm looking forward to getting up there and seeing the fish myself at some stage.
It's absolutely amazing what's been done there. Looks like you might have just got away with that one just in the nick of time.
The team are very dedicated.
Yeah, which brings me around to your personal, sometimes when you see like a really critical bit of land, do you sort of get in a bit of a panic and think, oh, God, we got to get our hands on this, or you now got enough experience that you're level-headed and think, well, one foot in front of the other type of thing? Do you sort of know what I mean?
That we're no, I know what you mean. And there's one property this last year where, we might not have been quite as level-headed because it was a really important property from a cultural perspective, as well as being a major weed issue in the area. So it was one of those ones that we really wanted to protect from being subdivided so that we could work with Jara, who are the traditional owners. This is Buckrebunyal near Wedderburn in Victoria. And so we had to do that really quickly. Needless to say, we like taking a little bit more time, but things come up opportunistically. So the key thing for us is making sure we've mapped all of the areas in which we operate, so we know those properties that we're interested in, and we also know those ones that we're not interested in. So I think the important thing when you're actually purchasing land and you're managing land, we're managing it forever. So we've got to really make sure that we are using donors' funds really effectively, and that we're choosing the right properties where we've got the greatest chance of success. So there is a detailed process we go through, and no decision is taken lightly when it comes to purchasing of land.
Absolutely. Sometimes a knee-jerk reaction is the right reaction anyway, so don't worry. If you did that with a knee-jerk reaction is not always the wrong way to go.
No, it's not always the wrong way. Just put a little bit of science around the knee-jerk though.
Absolutely. It's a big job and you're not going to be able to do it all without some mates. Let's talk about your partnerships, both industry partnerships, Aboriginal people, stuff like that. How do they contribute and you contribute to them?
Yeah. So I think there's a whole range of different partners. The first one I might touch on is our staff and volunteers. 150 staff, over 1,000 active volunteers. We couldn't do it without them. And then it's very much about those partnerships with the traditional owners and the neighbours of a lot of the properties. And, we work really hard trying to develop the relationships with the traditional owners so that we can work together to actually deliver the ecological outcomes and the broader outcomes that they're looking for in the landscapes. So we never go into a partnership without the partners wanting us there. So to give an example, we have a lot of partnerships with traditional owners on their managed land, particularly in Northern Australia. Some of those we've been involved with for over 10 years. And it's because those traditional owners asked us to be involved, and we take the time to really get to know each other and then develop plans together. And then we also have lots of other partnerships with, universities and researchers, different industry partners. We have this amazing company called Jord Engineering, where the staff come out and help us, but they help us on projects, engineering related projects. They come out each year. Every time I look at one of their magazines, they've got a write-up about a bush heritage project, and it's really great to have that link with organisations and the people that belong to them. And we have amazing pro bono supporters through big law firms, also through the accounting firms. So it's absolutely fantastic to have that support.
It takes a village, is the saying. And I just lost my train of thought.
Sorry, Dan, I should.
Yeah, sure.
No, I also completely forgot about our most important partners. We have 48,000 supporters.
Yeah, of course.
Without them, we couldn't do it. So, we're predominantly funded through philanthropy. So it's each one of those 48,000 people that have said, hey, we like the work of Bush Heritage. We want to be part of it. And that's super important.
Absolutely. Could you tell us what's going to be happening in 2022? Do you have any properties that you could let us know about, or just a general overview of what you're going to be up to?
Yeah. So end of last year, we launched our 2030 strategy, which was about deepening and doubling our impact, because the globe is telling us, climate change is telling us we have to do more, and we have to do it now. So that means that we will be looking to purchase more reserves. So watch this space for some announcements on that. We're looking to really deepen our relationship with traditional owners and working hard with them to understand what their priorities and how they might link in with ours. And then also doing some more work to expand our area, working with farmers and pastoralists. So really expanding in those areas. We've had some amazing new staff join us, which is phenomenal. The skills and the backgrounds of people is just amazing. Combine that with our volunteers and our supporter base, I know we can deepen and double our impact by 2030. So we're getting stuck into it. We're being innovative. We're using new technology. Look forward to sharing lots of stories over the coming year of the different things we've done, as well as our normal day-to-day of fire, feral animals and weeds, which doesn't sound overly sexy, but it's pretty important.
No, it's very, very important. And I think there's a general upswing in people being more aware of the environment, right?
there is a huge upswing, and I think that's one of the things that COVID may have helped for all of us. Being forced to be stuck at home, I think we all slowed down a little bit and had a little bit more look about what was in our backyards. And so I think that's been really important now that, we're seeing it more, that people are saying, actually, we need to protect this. We want to have these species here for our kids and our grandkids. We want to be able to go out in the spring and see little native orchids, or see a phascogale run up a tree. So, we really have had that opportunity through COVID to reflect on what's important here in Australia and look at protecting it.
Yeah, and plant some native species in your garden too. Why not? I'm a mad keen gardener. You don't know, but now you do know. And I've got a whole native garden. A set of the property we set aside just for native garden. It's beautiful, and maybe one day we'll see a lizard in this property. Well, nary a lizard. Isn't that weird? Not to see even a little skink.
But it's surprising though. Sometimes they're just hiding out where you least expect it. And although this is not a lizard example, we had put sound meters out at our Bulkamata Reserve looking for plains wanderers, really unique, critically endangered bird. And of course, we found nothing on the sound monitors, absolutely nothing. But then the ecologist was out there in a vehicle and almost ran one over. Actually, his story is it was at the side of the road. But, sure, we found, 4 or 5 of them just actually there within the landscape. So it's amazing if you use different ways of finding them. They'll be hiding out. The lizard probably just doesn't want to show itself to you.
Sure.
And it will appear one day when you least expect.
Yeah, I'm looking for some slug and snow control over here, Heather. Now, how is best to support Bush Heritage Australia?
Look, I think the best thing is have a look on the website, or give us a call. Happy to answer any questions that people have. There's different ways that people can support, whether they want to support in a monetary way, because as I said, we're philanthropically funded, or whether they have particular skills that they'd like to volunteer. Then we also have a volunteer portal, and a couple of times a year we open that up and then advertise particular roles and activities that we have. I think the key thing that I could say too is support the environment by getting out in it. Learn what's in your backyard, learn what's in your local area. And if you want to support us, that's great. If you want to support your local land care or coast care or other group, that's fantastic as well, because it's that collective effort of everybody working in the different landscapes that'll make the difference.
Absolutely, well said. And follow you on social media too, because that's a good time. You got your polls and your quizzes on Instagram. Lots of fun.
Well, and also another one that was launched today is a podcast series that we've just launched. So that's gone out today. So follow up on that one as well. And so, just read the stories, get engaged. We have a Bush Tracks sort of little magazine that comes out quarterly as well. Amazing stuff that people can be involved with.
I subscribe to that this very day.
So if you're looking for the podcast one, it's called Big Sky Country. And so the first
Big
story.
Sky Country.
This first episode was launched this morning.
The
first one is.
Give that a plug.
Yeah, no, it's great. And we're going to be releasing, I think it's one a week from now through to March.
Very, very, very good. Well, Heather Campbell, you're doing a great job there. Bush Heritage Australia, get involved. It's a worthy cause, but look, just get involved, right?
Oh, exactly. Just, get out there in the environment, come and join us on our journey, and all the other partner organisations, all of the other non-government and government organisations that are making a difference for species and the amazing environment we call Australia. Really look forward to seeing many of you out and about.
We can do this. It's not going to be as much effort to put Australia. Look, we spent so many years tearing it apart. It's not going to take as much effort to put it back together, I don't think. Thanks very much, Heather.
Look, thank you so much for the opportunity to say hi. And as I said, please reach out, come and say hi. Look forward to connecting with so many people.